Hey everyone, I'm Brian Sparks, the senior editor of Greenhouse Grower magazine, and I am here today with Michelle Klieger, the founder of Stratagerm Consulting, and Peter Conjoyan, who is the president of Conjoyan's Horticulture Education Services. Welcome, Peter and Michelle.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, hi Brian. Thanks for
Hello.
inviting us.
Sure. So at our upcoming Grow Executive Summit, Peter and Michelle are going to have a great conversation about how greenhouse operations can set themselves up for success in an inflationary market. Before we get to the discussion here, I do want to put in just a brief plug. If you are a podcast listener, Michelle and Peter do a podcast called The Grower and the Economist, which is highly recommended listening. It gives you some great perspectives on how to approach your business, both from the production side and on the farm and business management side of things. It's always a lively discussion. They have a lot of great guests. If you are a podcast listener, be sure to look for Grower and the Economist. So getting back to this presentation, I wanted to ask both of you, why this is such an important topic for today's audience of greenhouse growers.
Well, I would say that in preparing for this talk, Peter and I have talked a lot about how the environment is changing and fast moving, and there's a lot of risks, and whether that's from the economic side with higher interest rates, supply chain disruptions, all of these pieces, or from the production side on keeping your costs down and knowing what to sell for. All of these are difficult to do in a normal time, but when you add in this inflationary environment, the game just gets a lot harder. And so we want to take this opportunity to really point out some red flags, show where these points are that growers can focus on, and help navigate these really challenging times.
Brian, over the decades of my career, and you're aware of many of these events, but starting with the oil embargo of the 1970s, I've seen through the decades a handful of events from that one as a defining moment for our industry. And then we went through the 80s with very high interest rates and inflation. We went through a recession in the 90s and the Great Recession of 2008. COVID brought Michelle and myself together, Brian, to form the Grower and the Economist so that we could help small and medium-sized operations navigate the supply chain disruptions that Michelle just alluded to. And coming out of COVID, now she and I have some perspective looking back. And as she said, right now it's inflation ticking upward. And that's layered on top of continuing supply chain disruption. So while as an industry, we've been through a handful of events like this, and as COVID set in, we all thought it was so much different and worse as an industry, and it didn't turn out to be that bad or as bad as we were thinking it might be. So now in hindsight, with that gained perspective, we're able to compare it to some of these other events. And this one's different, yet it's the same. So I'm going to stop there and we'll come back to that.
Okay. And in kind of along those lines, I know, Peter, we'll start with you for this question. For those who are attending the event, what are some of the key lessons or takeaways that you think that the audience might be able to kind of glean from the discussion that you and Michelle are going to have?
That's a wonderful question. And Michelle and I will be presenting this as our natural tag team, she from the economics side, me from the production side. So what I'm going to focus on, Brian, are some very basic principles that we have all discussed and dealt with over time. I've always considered shrinkage as a silent assassin, and we'll talk a little bit about the principle that what goes out the back door can be more important as what goes out the front door. So we'll talk about that and how with rising costs and supply chain disruptions, we have to be even more careful about what's dumped and what's not sold. So during the Great Recession, many of my presentation titles were, do we want to grow long or sell out. And we had lively discussions around the country on which strategy was better for the bottom line. Michelle can bring lots of perspective to discussions like that. So I'm going to talk about things like that, also including automation and how that can help make us more efficient. And again, Brian, she and I focus on small and medium-sized operations. I understand there'll be all sizes of operations at the summit, but over my career, I've experienced the following. I don't worry about my fellow growers who are in the large category. They find ways to get their information. It's the smaller operations that I've always been concerned about because it's more difficult for them to hire consultants and whatnot. So many of my comments are geared towards smaller operations, but the basic principles, as you can imagine, hold for everybody.
I would say that Peter's normally the one with a catchphrase for all of our discussions. And for me, I keep coming back to knowing your fundamentals, that this is a chance to really focus on what your cost of production is, what your labor costs are, what you're selling for, like where are you really, and using that to ground yourself and make good decisions. And so the same way as talking about growing long or selling out, like where is your business? What have you experienced in the last couple of years? Where do you want to go? And so for me, it's just really focusing on the fundamentals right now, having a strong foundation to help weather any storm.
You know, it's funny, every time I listen to one of your podcast episodes, I can always determine the passion that each of you have for the industry coming from different perspectives. As we wrap up here, can each of you just talk more about what you like most about your job and about the industries that you're involved in?
Before, Brian, when you and I were talking, I said that I really love working across agriculture. I love that there are places that things overlap between different industries. And I also love how oftentimes people from different parts of agriculture don't overlap, and there really are great lessons to learn. So I kind of use that to my advantage, that I get to talk about all different things. I also just think that food and other products in agriculture are such a fundamental part of our lives, and most people don't think about it. But even without thinking about it, it's critical to every part of our lives, and it's so emotional for most people, and they don't think about it. So like I get to bring the passion and build on what everybody else's unknown passion is.
Peter, what about you?
Well, first I want to say, Brian, it takes one to know one. So you're crediting or complimenting Michelle and myself on our passion, and the fact that the three of us are here today talking about this topic says a lot about your passion for the industry. So kudos to that. I've enjoyed, as I get older, Brian, another catchphrase or a phrase I'm using often, and Michelle will roll her eyes when I say this. I enjoy saying now that a plant is a plant is a plant. And after having spent the majority of my professional career and research focus on ornamental crops, for the past decade, I've shifted to edible crops and hydroponic food production and dabbled in the cannabis industry. And that phrase becomes more true with each passing day and with each little nugget of experience that I gain. It becomes more and more true that yes, we might focus on bedding plants in one operation or hydroponic leafy greens in another, but the basic principles of production are the same. All of the lessons that people like Michelle are bringing to our industry apply regardless of the crop category. And our brothers and sisters who are involved in the cannabis industry, I'd like them to kind of move off their spot a little bit. There's nothing special about the cannabis plant in terms of how it grows and maybe how we consume it. There's something special about it, but you know, a plant's a plant's a plant. And I think just focusing on the principles, and as Michelle mentioned a moment ago very eloquently, it's fundamentals. So you can see where she and I converge in our thoughts a bit, where I might be recalling shrinkage principles or efficiency of automation and whatnot. She'll be talking about labor and cost of production. And it's nothing new. It's just that we have to focus and concentrate a little bit harder now, because even though COVID brought some positive or some benefits to our industry, as Michelle's describing, the inflationary environment that we're in, and the supply chain still being disrupted and doesn't show signs of recovering anytime soon. It's now to put your thumbs down, tighten the screws, and as she says, pay attention to fundamentals, and then I think everybody will be okay.
And, to one of your points there, Peter, that's ultimately one of the goals of the Grow Executive Summit is not just about different sizes of operations, but, you're bringing multiple crop segments together into one room. And, while the production specific challenges might differ based on the crop that you're growing, there are so many big picture issues, labor, inflation, supply chain, all the themes that we're addressing at the summit that affect everyone, regardless of your size, regardless of what you're growing. So you can expect even more in-depth conversation on this topic with Peter and Michelle at our Grow Executive Summit, which takes place November 30th through December 2nd in Fort McDowell, Arizona. You can go to growexecutivesummit.com to register and to learn more. And with that, Peter and Michelle, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. See you in a couple of weeks.
Yes, thank you.